There is something about the dark that makes our minds wander into places they normally would not go during the day. The quiet of night seems to magnify every sound, every shadow, and every uneasy feeling that creeps up on us. From the moment you close your eyes, you might hear a creak or a whisper, and wonder if it was just your imagination, or something else lurking nearby. Tonight, I want to take you on a journey through some of the most chilling stories, shared by strangers on Reddit. Stories meant to unsettle yet soothe you as you drift off to sleep. Our first story comes from a user who goes by the name Throwaway No Way. They wrote about their experience during a camping trip in the remote forests of the Pacific Northwest. It was a place known for its thick trees, dense fog, and the strange sense of being watched. They and a few friends had decided to camp out for a weekend away from the city. The first night was uneventful, quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. But on the second night, things took a turn. Around midnight, Throwaway No Way woke up to the sound of footsteps circling their tent. Outside, the thin fabric, the crunch of twigs and dry leaves was unmistakable. The footsteps paused, then moved away, then came back closer. The pattern repeated for what felt like hours. The user said they held their breath, hoping whatever it was would go away, but it did not. Finally, at dawn, the footsteps stopped suddenly. One of the friends whispered that they had seen a figure standing just beyond the trees, watching the tent all night. But when they turned on their flashlight, there was nothing there, just the empty forest. The story ended with Throwaway No Way saying they never camped in that forest again, and always double-checked their surroundings when outside. Now they never found out who or what had been circling their tent, but it left a lasting chill that no amount of daylight could warm. Our second tale is from a user called Silent Watcher who shared an experience that took place in a small town during a power outage. One night, the entire neighborhood lost electricity for hours, making the streets pitch black and eerily silent. The user was at home alone and decided to light some candles to pass the time. They sat by the window watching the shadows flicker on the walls when suddenly they saw something move outside. The streetlight at the end of the block was dead, and yet a silhouette appeared briefly against the dark sky. It looked like a person, but moved in a strange, jerky way, almost like it was not quite human. Frozen with fear, Silent Watcher watched as the figure disappeared behind a parked car. Then, without warning, the figure reappeared much closer, only this time it was staring straight at the window. The user said their heart stopped for a moment, and then they quickly drew the curtains, shutting out the view. The power came back on shortly after, and when they looked again, there was no one there, but the feeling of being watched lingered for days afterward. What makes this story so unsettling is the way it captures the helplessness of being alone in the dark when the world around you seems off, like something has slipped through the cracks of reality and is just waiting for you to notice. The third story is a little different, but just as creepy. It comes from a user named Lost Echo who describes their experience with a smart home device. One night, after they had gone to bed, the voice assistant in their house suddenly started responding on its own. It was late, and they had not called out any commands, but the device began to whisper words that did not make sense at first, then gradually became more coherent and disturbing. It told them to look outside the window to see what was there. Against their better judgment, Lost Echo got up and looked out. The street was empty, except for a figure standing under the street lamp. The figure was completely still, but the light seemed to cast a shadow that stretched unnaturally long. The device kept repeating a phrase that sent a chill down their spine. It said, "You are not alone." They never figured out if it was a glitch, a prank, or something else, but they unplugged the device immediately and did not use it again. This story touches on modern fears about technology and the unknown, when devices meant to help us suddenly feel like they are watching us instead of the other way around. Next, we move to a more traditional haunting tale shared by the user Old House Mystery. They wrote about moving into an old Victorian home in a quiet town. The house had a history of strange happenings, but they were excited about the chance to restore it to its former glory. The first few weeks were peaceful, but then odd things started happening. Doors would slam shut on their own, lights flickered, and there were footsteps in the hallway when no one else was home. One night, Old House Mystery heard a whisper right by their ear saying, "Leave now." At first, they tried to ignore it, thinking it was their imagination, but the activity increased. There were cold spots in certain rooms, and pictures fell off the walls by themselves. Eventually, they found old newspaper clippings hidden in the attic about a tragic death that occurred in the house many years before. It was then that they realized the presence was not friendly. The user moved out soon after, but said they sometimes hear the whispers again when they drive past the house late at night. This story reminds us how the past can linger in places long after the people involved are gone, and how some memories refuse to rest quietly. Finally, for this part, here is a chilling experience from the user Night Terrors, who told a story about waking up in the middle of the night to find a shadowy figure standing at the foot of their bed. The figure did not move or make a sound, just stood there watching. The user was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream. Then slowly the figure began to fade away until it disappeared completely. When they turned on the light, there was nothing there, but the feeling of dread stayed with them for days afterward. Night terrors said they had no explanation for what they saw, but it was one of the most terrifying moments of their life. They often wondered if it was a sleep paralysis episode, or something more sinister. Either way, it haunted their dreams for a long time. These stories from Reddit show us that fear comes in many forms, whether it is the natural fear of the dark, the unknown presence just beyond our vision, or the strange things that technology can do. There is always something that unsettles us when the world goes quiet at night. Listening to these tales as you close your eyes might make your heart race a little, but perhaps it will also remind you that you are not alone in the dark. If you find yourself too scared, just remember these are stories told by strangers meant to give you a shiver, but not to harm you. So breathe deeply, relax, and let your mind wander as the night unfolds. The darkness of night seems to hold secrets that daylight refuses to reveal. Some of these secrets are whispered by the wind rustling through trees, others hide in the silence between heartbeats waiting to be noticed. Tonight, I bring you more chilling tales from Reddit, where strangers share their encounters with the unknown, places that make the night a little colder and the shadows a little deeper. Our first story tonight is from a user called Shadowlurker, who described an experience that began during a late-night drive through a deserted stretch of highway. The road was long and straight, and surrounded by thick forest on both sides. The moon was hidden behind clouds, making the night pitch black, except for the headlights. The user was alone, and said they felt uneasy but could not explain why. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a figure appeared on the side of the road, a woman dressed in white, standing perfectly still with her long hair covering her face. Shadowlurker slowed down, hoping to see if she needed help, but when they got closer, the woman disappeared as if she had never been there. The user swore they saw her reflection in the rearview mirror for a moment, before it vanished too. Driving the rest of the way with trembling hands, they tried to forget what they saw, but the image haunted their thoughts for days. After researching, they found out that many drivers had reported seeing a similar figure in that area over the years, sometimes called a ghost hitchhiker or a lost soul. She remained an unsolved mystery. The idea of something appearing briefly then vanishing without a trace makes the mind race and wonder if we sometimes glimpse the edge of another world just for a moment. Next comes a story from the user Basement Whispers, who wrote about strange sounds coming from the basement of their new home. Soon after moving in, they started hearing low murmurs late at night. When everything else was silent, the voices were indistinct, like whispers carried on the wind, but clearly human. The user checked the basement many times but found no one there, or anything that could explain the noises. One night, they decided to record the sounds with their phone. When they played the recording back in the safety of their bedroom, the whispers seemed to form words. Some were pleas for help, others were warnings. The user shared the audio with friends who were just as unsettled, and encouraged them to call a paranormal investigator. The investigator said it might be residual energy trapped in the house from a tragic past event, but could not be sure whether it was spirits or the house settling. The whispers never stopped, completely making the basement a place no one dared enter after dark. Our third tale takes us to a small rural town where a user named Quiet Hollow described their encounter with a mysterious figure seen in the woods near their home. One autumn evening, while walking their dog, they noticed a tall, thin man standing among the trees. The man wore a dark trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. The dog growled and refused to approach. Quiet Hollow tried to talk to the man, but he said nothing and slowly faded into the shadows, disappearing before their eyes. The next day, they asked neighbors if anyone knew the man, but no one had ever seen him before. The user researched local legends and found stories of a mysterious wanderer who appeared at the edge of town, sometimes warning people of danger, or sometimes leading them into the woods, never to be seen again. The unsettling part of the story is the feeling that some encounters are not random but a part of something bigger, something ancient lurking beneath the surface of the ordinary world. From the depths of online forums comes a story by the user Forgotten Echo about an experience with a seemingly cursed object. They purchased an old mirror from an estate sale that was said to have belonged to a recluse who vanished mysteriously shortly after bringing the mirror home. Strange things began to happen. The reflection in the mirror would sometimes show scenes that were not happening in the room behind it. It showed places the user did not recognize, people they did not know, and sometimes distorted versions of themselves staring back with dark eyes. At night, the mirror seemed to glow faintly, and whispers echoed softly around it. The user tried to cover the mirror, and eventually got rid of it, but the feeling that something had crossed through the glass stayed with them. They warned others to be cautious of objects that hold more than just memories, because some things trap pieces of souls. The final story for this part comes from the user Nightwatcher, who shared a terrifying encounter in an abandoned hospital. The user worked as a security guard and was assigned to patrol the empty building overnight. One night, while walking the long silent corridors, they heard footsteps behind them. The footsteps matched their pace, but when they stopped, the footsteps stopped too. Turning around revealed no one there. The feeling of being followed grew stronger as they moved through the building. Suddenly a door slammed shut somewhere deep inside the hospital, and lights flickered on and off. The user felt a cold breath on the back of their neck, but could see no one. When morning finally came, the patrol ended with nothing visible to explain what had happened, but the memory of that night stayed vivid and haunting. Stories like these remind us that the night is filled with mysteries, some natural, some beyond our understanding. Each story shares a glimpse into the unknown, a place where fear and curiosity meet, and where the veil between worlds may be thinner than we realize. As you settle in to rest tonight, imagine these tales like shadows at the edge of your mind, not to terrify but to keep you company in the quiet darkness. Let your breath slow your heartbeat, and allow the unknown to whisper softly as you drift away. The night seems to stretch endlessly when shadows creep in corners and the silence grows heavy with unspoken things. Tonight, I bring you more stories shared by strangers on Reddit, tales of encounters with the strange and the eerie, whispered in the dark to settle your mind even as they stir a chill. Our first story tonight comes from a user named HollowSteps, who told about an unsettling experience in an old hotel. They checked in late one evening after a long drive and were given a room on the top floor. The hotel was mostly empty and had an air of faded grandeur, but also something old and restless about midnight. HollowSteps woke to the sound of footsteps pacing outside their door, slow, deliberate, and measured. They listened quietly, but when they opened the door, there was no one there, just the dimly lit hallway stretching into silence. The footsteps started again soon after this and repeated throughout the night. The user said the sound was so clear it felt like someone was walking right beside them, but whenever they tried to catch a glimpse, the hallway was empty. The next morning, the hotel staff said no one else had checked in that night, and the guest registry showed no record of anyone on the floor. HollowSteps left the hotel early and never returned. What makes this story linger is the feeling that some places keep their past alive in echoes, footsteps long forgotten yet still heard by those who listen closely. Next we move to a story from user Lost Signal, who described strange phone calls received in the middle of the night. The calls came from unknown numbers, and when answered there was only heavy breathing or faint whispers on the other end. Sometimes the line would go dead, and other times an eerie voice would say cryptic phrases like "they see you" or "not safe to sleep." The user tried blocking the numbers, but the calls kept coming, each night more frequent and more disturbing. After a few weeks, Lost Signal reported seeing a shadowy figure lurking outside their window. During one call, the figure disappeared when the lights were turned on, but the sense of being watched never left. They eventually changed their number and moved, but still felt haunted by the unknown caller. This story taps into the fear of invasion, the unsettling thought that someone or something is reaching out from the darkness directly into your life, disrupting your safety and peace. Our third story is by a user called Silent Hollow, who recounted an experience with a neighbor who seemed normal but revealed strange habits. One evening, Silent Hollow noticed the neighbor was digging a deep hole in their backyard under the moonlight. Curious, they asked what they were doing. The neighbor gave a vague answer about planting something, but when Silent Hollow looked again, the hole seemed much deeper than needed and oddly shaped. Over the next few nights, the neighbor continued digging, and on the final night, Silent Hollow saw them carry what looked like a large bundle wrapped in cloth toward the hole. The user felt uneasy and called the police, but by the time they arrived, the neighbor was gone, and the hole filled with loose dirt, but nothing else was found. The story ended with Silent Hollow saying they moved soon after and never learned what the neighbor was really doing, but the memory of those nights stayed with them. This story reminds us that sometimes the most ordinary people hide the darkest secrets just beneath the surface, and that curiosity can lead us into unsettling places. From a more supernatural angle comes a story shared by user Moonlit Gaze, who wrote about waking up to find an uninvited presence in their bedroom. They said one night they opened their eyes to see a figure standing silently near the window. The figure was tall, thin, and wore a long dark cloak with its face hidden in shadow. It did not move or speak, just stood watching. Moonlit Gaze tried to wake up fully but found themselves frozen, unable to call out or turn away. The figure remained until the first light of dawn, when it faded like mist, dissolving in the morning sun. The user said the experience left them shaken and wary of the dark for a long time afterward. This tale plays on the fear of helplessness and the unknown entity watching us when we are most vulnerable, reminding us how thin the line can be between sleep and wakefulness. Our last story for this part comes from the user Whispering Shadows, who described strange writing appearing on their walls late at night. At first it was faint letters that glowed softly in the dark, then the writing grew larger. More urgent messages appeared, pleading for help or warning of danger. The user tried washing the walls, repainting, but the words always returned the next night. One chilling message read, "You cannot hide forever." Another said, "They are coming soon." The user eventually moved out, but said the memory of those glowing words stayed with them, haunting their dreams. These stories show us that fear is not always loud. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, in footsteps, in whispers and shadows, and in words that appear unbidden, reminding us that the night holds more than just sleep and dreams. As you listen to these tales, let their eerie calm wrap around you like a blanket of cold air. Let your mind drift to places where reality bends and the unseen brushes past your thoughts. Breathe slowly, and let the night carry you gently into rest. Nightfall brings a stillness that feels heavier than the absence of light. As shadows deepen and silence stretches out, we become aware of things usually unnoticed. Tonight, I share more stories from Reddit users recounting eerie moments when the ordinary slipped away and the strange crept in. Our first story comes from a user named Dark Corridor who wrote about working the night shift at an old library. The building was quiet, except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the soft rustle of pages turning the final corner. One night, Dark Corridor felt the sudden presence of someone behind them, but when they looked, there was no one there, just the rows of empty shelves stretching into darkness. Later that night, a book fell off a shelf on its own, landing open to a page with a warning written in the margins. The message said, "Beware the watcher in the shadows." The user tried to ignore it, but the feeling of eyes following them grew stronger with each passing hour. When their shift ended, they hurried out and never returned to work nights again. The idea of being watched unseen reminds us how small and vulnerable we can feel even in places that seem safe and familiar. Next is a story from a user called Forgotten Path who described getting lost while hiking in the mountains. One evening as the sun set, they realized they had taken a wrong turn, and the path ahead disappeared into thick fog. The user said they felt an intense cold, even though the air was warm, and noticed strange footprints in the dirt not matching any animal they knew. As darkness fell, they heard distant chanting carried on the wind, but could see no source. The user hurried down the mountain and reached safety only after what felt like hours. The experience left them shaken and wary of wandering off marked trails again. This tale touches on the fear of losing control and wandering into unknown territory where unseen forces may wait. Our third story comes from the user Echoes in Darkness who recounted a terrifying experience with their childhood doll. One night, the doll appeared in a different room than where they left it. The user said they sometimes heard it whisper their name softly in the dark and noticed its eyes seemed to follow them even when no one was around. After a particularly frightening night, the user threw the doll away, but said they sometimes felt its presence still lingering in their home, especially at night when everything else was quiet. This story plays on childhood fears of toys coming to life and the feeling that some objects might hold more than just memories. From a different angle comes a tale shared by the user Night Tide who worked as a lighthouse keeper on a remote island. The isolation was profound with nothing but sea and sky for miles. One night during a fierce storm, they saw a glowing figure walking along the shore. The figure appeared translucent and moved slowly as if searching for something. Night Tide tried to call out, but the figure did not respond and vanished into the crashing waves. The experience stayed with them long after they left the island as a reminder of loneliness and the mysteries hidden by the sea. Our final story in this part is from the user Quiet Fears who described hearing strange knocking sounds coming from their attic. They said the knocks would start softly then grow louder as if someone or something was trying to get out or get in. The user bravely climbed up to check, but found nothing except old forgotten belongings covered in dust. Despite the empty attic, the knocking continued sporadically, and at night, it felt like the house was alive with unseen visitors waiting in silence. Stories like these invite us to consider the things just beyond our perception: the watcher in the shadows, the lost souls in the mist, the whispers in the dark. As you settle down to sleep tonight, imagine these stories surrounding you like a quiet fog holding you gently between the worlds of waking and dreaming. Let your breath slow your thoughts, calm your heartbeat, and allow the strange and mysterious to lull you into rest. Night's quiet seems to stretch endlessly as shadows grow longer and the world outside slows to a whisper. There is something about the stillness of darkness that invites us to listen closely, to hear what hides just beyond the reach of sight. Tonight, I bring you more stories shared by strangers on Reddit. Tales where the ordinary becomes unsettling, where the unknown presses softly against the edges of reality. These stories are meant to accompany you into sleep, to stir a chill without breaking the calm, like whispers carried on the night air. Our first story is from a user named Quiet Shadows. They described living in an old apartment building downtown, a place that had a history known by the locals but seldom spoken aloud. Quiet Shadows said that the building itself seemed to breathe with a life of its own, creaking and settling in the night like a giant slowly waking. The walls held the memories of decades, and sometimes those memories slipped through. One night, the user awoke to find faint tapping on their bedroom window. At first, it seemed like rain or branches brushing, but the air was still and dry. When Quiet Shadows looked, there was no sign of anything outside, only the darkened street below. Over the following nights, the tapping continued, always gentle, always just enough to pull them awake. One evening, A neighbor mentioned seeing a shadowy figure standing at the window of Quiet Shadow's apartment late at night, a figure that vanished when approached. The tapping was never explained, and Quiet Shadows moved away soon after, but the memory of those quiet knocks lingered in their mind. It was as if something was trying to reach out, to get attention without speaking. The story reminds us how silence itself can be loud, how small sounds in the night might carry meanings we cannot fully grasp. Our next tale comes from the user Hollow Echo, who recounted an experience involving a mysterious phone app. Hollow Echo downloaded a new weather app from a little-known developer. It seemed normal at first, displaying forecasts and temperatures, but after a few days, the app began sending strange notifications at odd hours. The messages were cryptic phrases such as, "Look outside now," or, "They are near." One night, Hollow Echo received a notification instructing them to open the app and look at the live radar feature. On the screen was a red dot moving toward their location, though nothing was visible outside. The dot seemed to stop right at their home. The phone then displayed the message, "Not safe." Shaken, Hollow Echo deleted the app and restarted the phone, but later the app reinstalled itself without consent. The notifications continued until Hollow Echo reset the phone completely. The experience felt invasive and unnerving, a reminder of how technology, which should make us feel secure, can sometimes deepen our fears instead. Our third story is from a user named Forest Watcher, who described camping in a remote area deep in the woods. They had chosen a spot far from trails to escape the noise of civilization. On the second night, Forest Watcher woke to strange noises around the tent, low growls, branches snapping, and a rustling that moved in a circle. They tried to stay quiet, hoping whatever it was would lose interest. The next morning, they found dozens of strange footprints around the campsite, some large and misshapen, unlike any animal tracks they knew. More disturbing was a set of smaller footprints leading into the forest but never returning. Forest Watcher felt watched for the rest of the trip and cut their stay short. The story taps into primal fears, the feeling of being stalked, of something unseen lurking just beyond vision. It reminds us how thin the barrier can be between the known world and the wilderness of mystery. Next is a story from the user Silent Steps, who shared a chilling experience with an elevator in an old office building. Late one night, after working overtime, Silent Steps took the elevator down to leave. The elevator stopped between floors and the lights flickered. Then the elevator doors opened to reveal a dark hallway instead of the lobby. Feeling uneasy, Silent Steps stepped out and found themselves in a long corridor with closed doors on either side. There was no sign of other people and no way to get back to the elevator. After what felt like minutes of walking, the corridor suddenly ended at a wall. Turning around, Silent Steps noticed a faint glow from one door and approached it. Pushing it open revealed the elevator again, this time at the lobby floor. The doors closed behind them, and the elevator descended normally. Silent Steps never took that elevator alone again. This story plays on the fear of being trapped, of reality bending just enough to confuse and frighten. It reminds us how familiar places can shift into something alien when we least expect it. Our fifth story comes from a user named Night Whisper, who recounted a terrifying encounter during a late-night walk home. Night Whisper often took the same route through a quiet neighborhood lined with tall trees and old houses. One night, they noticed a man standing under a street lamp ahead. The man was still and pale, wearing clothes that seemed out of place for the time of year. As Night Whisper drew closer, the man's eyes suddenly snapped open, glowing faintly in the dark. Frozen with fear, Night Whisper watched as the figure slowly turned and vanished into the shadows. No one else was around, and the streetlight flickered off seconds later. Night Whisper hurried home and did not take that route again for months. The story reminds us how sometimes the eyes we meet in the dark may not belong to anyone human, how appearances can deceive and shadows can hold secrets better left unseen. Our final story for this part is from the user Whispering Walls, who described their experience in a rented house that had been vacant for years. Soon after moving in, Whispering Walls noticed faint voices echoing through the rooms at night. The voices were unintelligible at first but seemed to grow clearer over time, forming words like leave, listen, and remember. One night, Whispering Walls awoke to find messages scratched into the bedroom walls, messages that were not there before. The writing was hurried and desperate, as if someone was trying to communicate through the very fabric of the house. Friends and family dismissed the experiences as imagination, but Whispering Walls eventually moved out, feeling unable to stay in a place that seemed alive with secrets and sorrow. This story shows us how spaces can hold the weight of past lives and how the walls themselves may whisper stories we cannot ignore. It reminds us that some homes keep memories not just in objects but in the very air around us. As you listen to these stories tonight, imagine the quiet tapping at the window, the glowing eyes in the dark, the impossible corridors that shift and change. Let these tales settle softly in your mind like shadows that flicker but do not bite. Breathe deeply, feel your body relax, and let the night carry you gently into dreams where mystery waits not to harm but to hold you in its quiet embrace. The darkness of night carries a special kind of stillness, a quiet that settles deep into the bones and opens the mind to thoughts and feelings that daytime noise often drowns out. It is in these hours, when the world is hushed and shadows stretch longer than usual, that strange stories come alive. Tonight, I share more eerie tales from Reddit users, accounts of moments when reality seemed to slip just enough for the uncanny to seep through. These stories are meant to be companions as you drift toward sleep, gentle reminders that the night holds more than just silence. Our first story tonight comes from a user named Dread Echoes. They wrote about an experience in an old family home that had been passed down through generations. The house was large and creaked with age, full of narrow hallways and forgotten rooms. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Dread Echoes sat alone reading in the living room when suddenly the lights flickered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness, but what followed was stranger still. A faint tapping began at the window. The taps were irregular but deliberate, like someone trying to send a message. When Dread Echoes looked, the storm had blown out, leaving the world outside calm and empty. No rain, no wind, just darkness. The tapping continued sporadically through the night, moving from window to window. At one point, Dread Echoes swore they heard whispers carried on the wind, words half-formed and pleading. In the morning, the house seemed untouched by the storm, but a layer of muddy footprints was visible along the porch. Footprints too small to belong to an adult and not matching any known animal. The story ends with the user saying they never stayed alone in the house again. This tale taps into the fear of unseen visitors, of something small and persistent that refuses to be ignored. It reminds us how old places may hold secrets that refuse to rest. Our next story is from a user called Mirrorgaze, who described a disturbing encounter with their bathroom mirror. One night after brushing their teeth, Mirrorgaze noticed something odd. Their reflection moved slightly out of sync with their own motions, as if it were delayed or lagging behind. At first, they thought it was a trick of the light or tired eyes, but then the reflection smiled when they did not. It was a slow, knowing smile that did not reach the eyes. Panic set in as Mirrorgaze realized their reflection was no longer mimicking but acting on its own. For several nights after, the user reported seeing their reflection blink independently, or make subtle gestures when they were not looking directly. Attempts to cover or replace the mirror did not end the phenomenon. Eventually, Mirrorgaze moved to a new apartment, but still feels uneasy around mirrors late at night. This story plays on the idea that what we see in reflections may not always be ourselves, that glass can be a barrier but also a gateway for things just beyond our understanding. The third tale comes from a user named LostPath who shared a frightening experience while hiking alone in a dense forest. They set out early, following a marked trail that had been well used by locals. However, as afternoon wore on, the trail became faint, swallowed by undergrowth and mist. LostPath decided to turn back but found that the path behind seemed different, twisted and unfamiliar. Trying to find their way, they stumbled upon a small clearing where a circle of stones stood arranged in a strange pattern. In the center was a shallow pit filled with blackened earth. Suddenly, LostPath heard a low chant in a language they did not recognize carried softly by the wind. Panicked, they hurried away, but no matter which direction they took, the forest seemed to bend and shift, trapping them in a maze of shadows and whispers. Hours later, exhausted and frightened, LostPath finally emerged near a road but vowed never to return to that part of the woods. This story reflects the primal terror of becoming lost in a place where nature itself seems to conspire against escape, where the very earth holds mysteries that resist understanding. Next is a tale from the user Nightwatcher who worked as a security guard in an old museum. The museum was a grand building filled with artifacts and art that spanned centuries. One night, while patrolling the Egyptian exhibit, Nightwatcher noticed the dim glow of a small light flickering from behind a glass case. Approaching carefully, they found no electrical source or explanation. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply and the air grew heavy with a scent like incense and earth. Then came the sound, soft footsteps echoing down the marble halls, slow and deliberate, but no one was visible on the cameras. Nightwatcher said they felt a presence lingering, watching, waiting. The next day, museum staff confirmed that the exhibit had once housed the remains of a priestess rumored to have been buried alive. The user said the experience left them uneasy about night shifts forever. This story reminds us how places can carry the weight of history so deeply that the past feels alive, whispering and moving just beyond the veil. Our fifth story comes from the user Whispertrail who shared a chilling moment on a long road trip. While driving alone at night on a desolate highway, Whispertrail spotted a figure standing by the roadside. The figure was pale and motionless, wearing a dark coat and hat, face obscured by shadow. Despite the isolation, the user felt compelled to stop and offer help. When they rolled down the window and called out, the figure vanished, leaving only an empty road behind. Later, checking the rearview mirror, Whispertrail noticed faint footprints appearing on the pavement where the figure had stood. Footprints that glowed faintly in the moonlight before fading away. The user sped off, feeling a deep unease that lingered long after the road returned to normal. This story evokes the classic fear of hitchhikers who may not be what they seem, embodying the mystery and danger that can lurk even in the most familiar places. Our final story tonight is from the user Silent Echo, who described a strange phenomenon with electronic devices in their home. Over several weeks, Silent Echo noticed that clocks would reset to odd times, radios would turn on and off by themselves, and their phone screen would sometimes flicker showing static or blurred faces. The user felt watched and often heard faint static-filled whispers when no one else was around. One night, Silent Echo awoke to find all the devices simultaneously activating, the television displaying static, phones ringing silently, and clocks flashing midnight. The whispers grew louder, forming half-words and cryptic warnings before suddenly stopping. The next morning, everything returned to normal, but the feeling of unease remained. This story illustrates how the modern world, filled with technology, can sometimes become a medium for the unknown, turning familiar devices into conduits for something beyond comprehension. As you lay back and let these stories flow through your mind, picture the dim glow of ancient lights flickering in empty halls, the slow tapping on forgotten windows, the shifting reflections in mirrors that watch back. Feel the chill of mist rolling over quiet lakes, the weight of history pressing silently in old homes. Let your breath grow steady and deep, your heartbeat slow as you drift between wakefulness and dreams. May these stories become the gentle shadows that cradle you tonight, the whispered echoes guiding you into peaceful rest where mystery sleeps beside you. The night is a vast and quiet place, where the usual sounds fade away and silence stretches deeper than the eye can see. It is a moment between worlds, where the boundary between reality and the unknown thins like fragile glass ready to crack. The stories you are about to hear are whispers from that fragile space, tales told by Reddit users who have glimpsed the uncanny, who have felt the breath of something unseen, who have heard the soft footsteps echoing just beyond reach. As you listen, let your mind wander into the quiet darkness, where mystery waits patiently to be discovered. Our first story tonight comes from a user called Forgotten Hallways who wrote about a time they stayed overnight in an abandoned hotel. The building was once grand, now crumbling and silent except for the sounds of nature reclaiming its corners. Forgotten Hallways arrived just as the sun was setting, eager to explore but also uneasy at the deep shadows pooling in the long empty corridors. As night fell, the silence deepened. The user described hearing footsteps echoing down the hallways, slow and deliberate, but never quite close enough to see who or what made them. Doors creaked open and shut on their own, and sometimes a faint humming could be heard, like a lullaby sung by a forgotten voice. The most unsettling moment came when Forgotten Hallways took a picture of one dark hallway, and in the photo appeared a pale figure standing just beyond the light, eyes hollow and fixed on the camera. The figure vanished when the user looked up, and no one else was in the building. The experience left a lasting impression, a reminder that some places hold memories so deep they seep into the present like mist. This story is a haunting reminder of how abandoned places can trap echoes of the past, trapped souls or memories that linger long after the last footsteps have faded. Next, we have a story from the user Duskwatcher who shared an eerie encounter with a roadside diner. Traveling late at night, Duskwatcher stopped for a meal at a small, old diner that seemed frozen in time. The place was nearly empty except for a few quiet patrons and an older man behind the counter who greeted them with a knowing smile. While eating, Duskwatcher noticed the other customers seemed pale and quiet, staring blankly ahead. When they asked the man about it, he only said, "They come here when the road gets too dark, and sometimes they don't leave." The user laughed it off nervously but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Later, after leaving the diner, Duskwatcher glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the faces of the passengers on the back seats, faces pale and shadowed, with hollow eyes staring silently. When they looked again, the seats were empty. The memory of the diner and its ghostly patrons lingered long after the highway had swallowed the night. This tale captures the feeling that some places exist out of time, a liminal space where lost souls gather, waiting for the right moment to vanish or to follow. Our third story comes from the user Candle Shadow who told of a strange experience with flickering lights in their apartment. Candle Shadow lived in a high-rise building, and late one night the lights began to blink on and off in an irregular pattern. At first, it seemed like a power surge, but then the flickering took on a rhythm, almost like a message or a code. Curious and unsettled, Candle Shadow recorded the lights and later deciphered the pattern as a series of taps, repeating endlessly. The taps spelled out words in Morse code, warnings and names that the user did not recognize but that felt deeply personal. When the user shared the message online, others reported similar flickering lights in the same building, and some claimed to have seen shadowy figures lurking in the hallways during power outages. The experience left Candle Shadow feeling watched and vulnerable, a reminder that even the smallest flicker of light can hold a message from the dark. This story speaks to the idea that sometimes the simplest signals are the hardest to ignore, that hidden messages may ripple beneath the surface of our everyday lives. Next is a tale from the user Night Hollow who worked late shifts in a hospital. One night while checking an empty wing, Night Hollow heard soft crying coming from a room long since closed. Opening the door cautiously, they found only an old rocking chair moving gently back and forth in the dim light. The crying grew louder, but there was no one else in the room. When Night Hollow shut the door, the sound stopped abruptly, leaving only silence. In the following days, hospital staff recounted stories of a child who had passed away years before, whose spirit was said to linger near the room, seeking comfort. The user described a feeling of sadness and loss that clung to the air, as if the building itself remembered and mourned the child. This haunting presence was never seen directly, but felt deeply. This story reminds us how places can carry grief like a tangible weight, and how loss can echo silently through empty spaces. Our fifth story comes from the user Window Silence who described a chilling experience involving their apartment window. One night, while looking out into the street, Window Silence noticed a figure standing motionless on the sidewalk, a man wearing a hat pulled low, face obscured by shadow. The figure never moved but seemed to watch the window intently. Over several nights, the figure appeared at the same time, always silent and still. Attempts to look away or close the blinds did not make the figure disappear. On the last night, Window Silence saw the figure's eyes glow faintly red before vanishing as if dissolving into the darkness. The experience left the user feeling vulnerable, as though someone had been observing them for much longer than they realized. The mystery of the silent watcher remained unsolved. This story taps into the deep fear of being watched, the unsettling idea that unseen eyes may follow our every move without our knowledge. Finally, we come to the story from the user Hollow Whispers who recounted a terrifying moment in a forest at night. While camping alone, Hollow Whispers heard whispers carried by the wind, soft voices calling their name. The voices seemed close but impossible to locate. Following the sounds, the user stumbled into a circle of ancient stones partially hidden in the underbrush. The air grew cold, and a heavy silence fell. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, replaced by a low hum vibrating through the earth. Hollow Whispers felt an overwhelming presence pressing down, as if the forest itself was alive and watching. Panicked, The user fled the clearing and did not return to the woods again. The experience left a lasting impression of how nature can hold ancient mysteries that defy explanation. This story reflects the primal fear of the unknown lurking in the wild, of voices carried on the wind that do not belong to any living being. As you lie here now, let these stories settle in your mind like soft shadows dancing just beyond your sight. Feel the hush of forgotten hallways, the flicker of messages in the dark, the weight of unseen watchers outside your window. Let your breath slow and steady, your heart find calm as the mysteries of night wrap gently around you. May these tales be the quiet companions of your rest, the whispered echoes guiding you safely into the world of dreams, where the night holds its secrets until dawn. The night is a vast and quiet place, where the usual sounds fade away and silence stretches deeper than the eye can see. It is a moment between worlds, where the boundary between reality and the unknown thins like fragile glass ready to crack. The stories you are about to hear are whispers from that fragile space. Tales told by Reddit users who have glimpsed the uncanny, who have felt the breath of something unseen, who have heard the soft footsteps echoing just beyond reach. As you listen, let your mind wander into the quiet darkness, where mystery waits patiently to be discovered. Our first story tonight comes from a user called Forgotten Hallways who wrote about a time they stayed overnight in an abandoned hotel. The building was once grand, now crumbling and silent except for the sounds of nature reclaiming its corners. Forgotten Hallways arrived just as the sun was setting, eager to explore but also uneasy at the deep shadows pooling in the long empty corridors. As night fell, the silence deepened. The user described hearing footsteps echoing down the hallways, slow and deliberate, but never quite close enough to see who or what made them. Doors creaked open and shut on their own, and sometimes a faint humming could be heard, like a lullaby sung by a forgotten voice. The most unsettling moment came when Forgotten Hallways took a picture of one dark hallway, and in the photo appeared a pale figure standing just beyond the light, eyes hollow and fixed on the camera. The figure vanished when the user looked up, and no one else was in the building. The experience left a lasting impression, a reminder that some places hold memories so deep they seep into the present like mist. This story is a haunting reminder of how abandoned places can trap echoes of the past, trapped souls or memories that linger long after the last footsteps have faded. Next, we have a story from the user Duskwatcher who shared an eerie encounter with a roadside diner. Traveling late at night, Duskwatcher stopped for a meal at a small, old diner that seemed frozen in time. The place was nearly empty except for a few quiet patrons and an older man behind the counter who greeted them with a knowing smile. While eating, Duskwatcher noticed the other customers seemed pale and quiet, staring blankly ahead. When they asked the man about it, he only said, "They come here when the road gets too dark, and sometimes they don't leave." The user laughed it off nervously but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Later, after leaving the diner, Duskwatcher glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the faces of the passengers on the back seats, faces pale and shadowed, with hollow eyes staring silently. When they looked again, the seats were empty. The memory of the diner and its ghostly patrons lingered long after the highway had swallowed the night. This tale captures the feeling that some places exist out of time, a liminal space where lost souls gather, waiting for the right moment to vanish or to follow. Our third story comes from the user Candle Shadow who told of a strange experience with flickering lights in their apartment. Candle Shadow lived in a high-rise building, and late one night the lights began to blink on and off in an irregular pattern. At first, it seemed like a power surge, but then the flickering took on a rhythm, almost like a message or a code. Curious and unsettled, Candle Shadow recorded the lights and later deciphered the pattern as a series of taps, repeating endlessly. The taps spelled out words in Morse code, warnings and names that the user did not recognize but that felt deeply personal. When the user shared the message online, others reported similar flickering lights in the same building, and some claimed to have seen shadowy figures lurking in the hallways during power outages. The experience left Candle Shadow feeling watched and vulnerable, a reminder that even the smallest flicker of light can hold a message from the dark. This story speaks to the idea that sometimes the simplest signals are the hardest to ignore, that hidden messages may ripple beneath the surface of our everyday lives. Next is a tale from the user Night Hollow who worked late shifts in a hospital. One night while checking an empty wing, Night Hollow heard soft crying coming from a room long since closed. Opening the door cautiously, They found only an old rocking chair moving gently back and forth in the dim light. The crying grew louder, but there was no one else in the room. When Night Hollow shut the door, the sounds stopped abruptly, leaving only silence. In the following days, hospital staff recounted stories of a child who had passed away years before, whose spirit was said to linger near the room, seeking comfort. The user described a feeling of sadness and loss that clung to the air, as if the building itself remembered and mourned the child. This haunting presence was never seen directly, but felt deeply. This story reminds us how places can carry grief like a tangible weight, and how loss can echo silently through empty spaces. Our fifth story comes from the user Window Silence, who described a chilling experience involving their apartment window. One night, while looking out into the street, Window Silence noticed a figure standing motionless on the sidewalk, a man wearing a hat pulled low, face obscured by shadow. The figure never moved but seemed to watch the window intently. Over several nights, the figure appeared at the same time, always silent and still. Attempts to look away or close the blinds did not make the figure disappear. On the last night, Window Silence saw the figure's eyes glow faintly red before vanishing as if dissolving into the darkness. The experience left the user feeling vulnerable, as though someone had been observing them for much longer than they realized. The mystery of the silent watcher remained unsolved. This story taps into the deep fear of being watched, the unsettling idea that unseen eyes may follow our every move without our knowledge. Finally, we come to the story from the user Hollow Whispers, who recounted a terrifying moment in a forest at night. While camping alone, Hollow Whispers heard whispers carried by the wind, soft voices calling their name. The voices seemed close but impossible to locate. Following the sounds, the user stumbled into a circle of ancient stones partially hidden in the underbrush. The air grew cold, and a heavy silence fell. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, replaced by a low hum vibrating through the earth. Hollow Whispers felt an overwhelming presence pressing down, as if the forest itself was alive and watching. Panicked, the user fled the clearing and did not return to the woods again. The experience left a lasting impression of how nature can hold ancient mysteries that defy explanation. This story reflects the primal fear of the unknown lurking in the wild, of voices carried on the wind that do not belong to any living being. As you lie here now, let these stories settle in your mind like soft shadows dancing just beyond your sight. Feel the hush of forgotten hallways, the flicker of messages in the dark, the weight of unseen watchers outside your window. Let your breath slow and steady, your heart find calm as the mysteries of night wrap gently around you. May these tales be the quiet companions of your rest, the whispered echoes guiding you safely into the world of dreams, where the night holds its secrets until dawn. The quiet of night welcomes us once more. Outside, the world is still, blanketed in dark and heavy silence. Inside, your breathing slows, your eyes grow heavy, and thoughts begin to drift into softer, stranger places. In that space, between waking and sleeping, our minds are most open to stories. The ones shared tonight are like whispers from that thin place. Strange things people have witnessed. Soft, quiet hauntings. Shadows that pass close, just out of reach. Whether you believe or not, these stories are here to guide you into the safe quiet of sleep. Just close your eyes and listen. Our first story tonight comes from a user named Basement Drift. As a teenager, they moved into a house with an unfinished basement. It was cold, the floor made of cracked cement, and the single light bulb rarely worked properly. One night, during a power outage, Basement Drift and their sibling went downstairs to check the fuse box. As they descended into the pitch black, they both heard what sounded like soft dragging footsteps moving across the floor below them. But neither of them were in the basement yet. They froze, waiting. The steps stopped too. For several moments, there was only silence. Then they heard breathing. Not their own. Low, labored, and coming from just ahead in the dark. They turned and ran back upstairs without fixing the fuse. When the power returned hours later, they went down again, only to find long, thin scratch marks across the floor leading to the far wall. Marks that hadn't been there before. The user never figured out what made them. And from then on, the basement door stayed locked at night. Sometimes fear isn't about what we see, but about what we almost see. What we hear, what we feel, what we know is just a few feet away in the dark, waiting. Our next story comes from the user Static Eyes, who was visiting their cousin's rural farm. The house was old and quiet, nestled deep in the woods, and the only sound at night was the steady chirping of insects. On their third night, Static Eyes was falling asleep in the guest bedroom when the crickets outside suddenly stopped. All at once. It was like someone had flipped a switch. Then came the knock. 3 soft, deliberate knocks on the window beside their bed. They turned over, heart racing, but the window was too dark to see out. After a minute of silence, they got up and peeked through the curtain. Nothing. No wind. No movement. Just silence. But as they turned back toward the bed, they noticed something strange. A smear of dirt on the window pane, shaped like a hand. 5 long, spindly fingers, pressed gently against the glass. They told no one. But the next night, it happened again. And the night after that. Until Static Eyes cut their visit short and left a day early. This story echoes a classic fear. Something outside, something trying to get in, not loudly, but with quiet persistence. And the thought that even glass may not be enough to keep it out. The third story comes from Cold Porch Light, who worked night security at an old boarding school. The school was mostly empty during summer months, with only a skeleton crew on campus. One evening, while doing routine rounds, they noticed a light flickering on the 3rd floor of one of the dorms. That floor had been locked and unused for over a year. They went to check, thinking it might be faulty wiring or a student who had snuck in. But the door to the hallway was locked and had to be opened with a special master key, which they retrieved from the office. Once inside, they walked slowly down the hallway, flashlight cutting through the stillness. All the dorm room doors were closed, except one. Inside that room was an old desk, a chair, and a mattress on the floor. Cold Porch Light stepped inside and looked around. The desk lamp was on, buzzing faintly. Beside it was a photograph. One they recognized. A black and white picture of a student who had died the previous year under mysterious circumstances. The same student whose room this had once been. They didn't report it. And after that, they refused to do rounds in that building again. There's something uniquely eerie about places meant for children, for learning, for safety, when they become empty and silent. When you begin to wonder if they ever really empty at all. Our fourth story is told by a user named Redline Signal, who commuted daily by train. Every evening, they took the last train home from work. It was always quiet, usually empty by the time they reached the final few stops. One evening, while sitting alone in a nearly dark carriage, the train suddenly stopped between stations. The lights dimmed to emergency mode. There was no announcement. After a few minutes, Redline Signal looked up and saw a person sitting directly across from them. They hadn't heard anyone board. And they were sure no one had been there seconds earlier. The figure sat unnaturally still, head down, hair hanging forward. No movement. Redline Signal watched nervously for what felt like minutes. Then the lights flickered. When they steadied, the figure was gone. No doors had opened. There was nowhere for them to go. That night, Redline Signal walked the rest of the way home. They took a different train the next day. A ghost on public transport. A quiet passenger. Someone who joins you only when no one else is around. It's the sort of story that lingers, not loud, not dramatic, but slow and creeping, like fog settling on your shoulders. Our next tale is from Stillness Calls, who was house-sitting for a friend in a quiet suburban neighborhood. One night around 2 a.m., they woke to the sound of the doorbell. Just once. A single ring. They hesitated, unsure if they had dreamed it. Then came a knock. Slow. Measured. Just 3 times. They got up and peered through the peephole. On the porch stood a little girl, maybe 7 years old. She wore a pale blue dress and had short black hair. No expression. She didn't speak. Just looked up at the door with wide, unblinking eyes. Stillness Calls opened the window beside the door slightly to ask if she was okay. The girl didn't move. Didn't answer. Didn't blink. Then she whispered something. "I found you." Stillness calls slammed the window and called the police. But when they arrived, the girl was gone. No footprints. No signs anyone had been there. That phrase, "I found you," has haunted them ever since. This story taps into something universal. The fear of being watched. Of being chosen. Of being found by something you didn't even know was looking for you. Finally, we have a story from the user 13th Step, who shared something that happened during a trip to a mountain lodge. It was remote, several miles from the nearest road, with no phone signal and only a single generator for electricity. They stayed in a small cabin with 2 friends. The first night passed quietly. The second night, around midnight, the generator cut out. Suddenly, it was completely dark. They lit a lantern and gathered in the main room, unsure whether to investigate. But then they heard it. A soft scraping sound on the cabin walls. Like claws dragging across the wood. Then came footsteps. Around the cabin, slow and deliberate. Pausing occasionally. As if listening. One friend shouted, thinking it was a prank. But the sound didn't stop. Then came knocking. Not at the door, but at the windows. All around them. As if whatever it was had more than 2 hands. They huddled in silence until morning. When the sun rose, they stepped outside to find long, deep gouges in the wood around every window. But no tracks in the dirt. Nothing but silence and dew.